Lawmakers returning to Congress this week with a very full plate. First, that aggressive tax plan we've been talking about that the White House is apparently pushing together of a 15% corporate tax cut. Plus, health care is still on the table, as well as funding for the border wall. And that could lead to the possibility of a government shutdown. That's looming, and it threatens to derail just about everything else, maybe including your portfolio. Will Democrats vote for any of this? We're joined by Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. He also sits on the House Budget Committee. Brendan, we were going to start with government shutdown. Hold off on that for a second. Let's get to this tax plan that the Wall Street Journal says is something that President Trump is pushing hard, and that would be to cut the corporate tax rate from 35%, the highest in the world, the free world here, and then down to about 15%. Is that something Democrats could look at and say that actually would stimulate growth?
Great to be back, Liz. You know, the last time that we achieved tax reform, fundamental tax reform, was 1986 with President Reagan and Democratic Senator Bill Bradley. The heart of that tax reform was lowering the rates and broadening the base. We should do that both in the corporate sector and the individual sector. I think there's fundamental agreement on both sides of the aisle on that in the abstract. The challenge is when you come to the details. Certain things that I identify in the corporate tax code as loopholes, such as parking funds offshores, other people around here, particularly on the Republican side, might say, no, those are legitimate deductions and not necessarily loopholes. So I would be in favor of achieving a fair reform that would bring down what is the lowest tax rate in the world on the corporate side, as you pointed out, and make us more competitive abroad. But we have to make sure we know what those details are and that it's revenue neutral.
Okay, but you're comfortable with lowering the corporate tax rate and, of course, for middle class.
Right, lowering the rate and broadening the base, both on the corporate side and also on the individual side. But again, let's see what the details are. The
president needs you for that. He needs your vote for an avoidance of the government shutdown, which is looming come midnight Friday night. Representative Boyle, tell me, will the government be open next Monday, or will Democrats just put a line in the sand when it comes to funding the border wall, which President Trump says has got to be in there?
Yeah, well, first, there are 48 more Republican members in the House than Democratic members, so they could pass a budget pretty comfortably without any Democratic votes in the House. Now, that said, I'm glad that we're finally talking, I mean we, meaning all of us in the general public, talking about the possibility of a government shutdown, because up until the last 24 hours, I think we haven't been talking about it enough. I think there are real challenges, again, on the Republican side, between the more doctrinaire Freedom Caucus members and maybe more of the moderate members.
Am I hearing you say that it's a very real possibility?
Correct. So my view is, and this might be contrary to conventional wisdom out there, I think it's a much more realistic possibility than people recognize. So I am very concerned about it. The last couple of government shutdowns were bad for the markets, were bad for our economy.
Okay, but I know you say, and you're correct, that in the House it could pass with no Democratic votes, but let's just say that it's a budget plan that works on nearly every level, but it also has some funding for the wall. Now, today, Sean Spicer said something, he almost let a little chink in the armor there by saying that it could be funding for the wall or security around what is an existing border wall. Could you, as a Democrat, vote for something like that, more increased security, guards, and drones?
So, first, I completely oppose any sort of border wall. It's a waste of money and ineffective, especially at the same time we're cutting valuable programs like Meals on Wheels and the EPA. So that's number one. Number two, I would be willing to vote for what's Washington speak, a clean CR. In other words, we get up against the government shutdown. In order to avoid a shutdown, we continue conversations for another week or two, and we keep funding levels exactly the way they are. No funding for border wall, no one trying to play any sort of games. If the Republican president and the Republican House and Senate holds funding the government hostage over this border wall issue, they will not get a yes vote from me. And they should not expect to be bailed out by any Democratic votes if they play that game.
Congressman Brendan Boyle, I think you're pretty clear on that. And I'm sure Nancy Pelosi and company are saying the exact same thing, that this is the stand.
I believe so. We'll come back into caucus tomorrow, but I can't imagine one Democratic voter, as much as we want to keep the government, or one Democratic member, as much as we want to keep the government funded, we're not going to suddenly compromise our principles just because we're being held hostage.
Good to see you, Representative. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Liz.
Congressman Brendan Boyle, Democrat from Pennsylvania, being very clear on what he will and won't vote for.